No Time to Die, out in theaters after the pandemic delay of over a year. The movie was originally scheduled to release in April 2020. This is the 25th James Bond film and the fifth and final appearance of Daniel Craig in the role. It's also starring Lea Seydoux, Rami Malek, Lashana Lynch, Ralph Fiennes, Ben Whishaw, Naomi Harris, Jeffrey Wright, Billy Magnussen, Christoph Waltz, and Ana de Armas. It was directed by Kerry Joji Fukunaga, known mainly for True Detective, Maniac, and Beasts of No Nation. And one more interesting piece of trivia, Phoebe Waller-Bridge of Fleabag fame was brought on to polish the script, more specifically to touch up the dialogue, especially for the female characters. I won't talk about the specifics of the plot, because I don't want to spoil anything. The very, very basic outline is that Bond is retired, again, and eventually goes back in action, again, into a plot which involves the past of his girlfriend Madeleine, the mysterious organization called Spectre, and a brand new villain called Safin. I will just try to focus on, instead of the story, on what I liked and I didn't like about the film, because yes, there's both. In fact, I found the movie to be slightly disappointing, if I'm honest, even if I really enjoyed some elements of it. I think that it ends up being just okay-ish, because the flaws prevent it from reaching the levels of Casino Royale or Skyfall. I'll start with the good stuff. The film looks gorgeous. It was shot on IMAX cameras and looks the part. The locations, the light, the camera work, great stuff there, no doubt. Especially the action sequences are very well choreographed. Daniel Craig is excellent as usual, so are his co-stars. In particular, I think Ana de Armas is one of the absolute shining points in her brief appearances. In her brief appearance, Jeffrey Wright is very charismatic, returning as Felix Leiter. All the other people are very good as well. I like the score written by Hans Zimmer. I also like the sound design and mixing, which is noticeably splendid. There is one moment, for example, where a bomb goes off and Bond is temporarily, partially deafened, and we along with him. All the driving and shooting sounds exactly as it should. There are also quieter moments, largely involving the soft-spoken Safin, which are mixed perfectly as well. I also enjoyed the fact that, as serious as it is, and in fact the whole series with Craig has been way more serious than previous Bonds, there are also some really fun moments of levity in here and humor, which mostly works, apart from maybe one super corny line where someone says, "Do you know what time it is? It's time to die," and then they kill the other person. It's atrocious. In general though, I'd say that the first half of the film is basically peak Bond. A perfect blend of action, humor, wit, charm, and chemistry between the actors, and an engaging plot. It's on its way to become a really fantastic movie. However, as soon as the Cuba sequence ends and we're back to UK for a while, things start slowing down, and then Act 3 is bafflingly stupid, which has to do partially with the pacing of the film. I mean, it's the longest Bond movie ever at 2 hours 43 minutes, and it is too long. I was dozing off by the end. But the main reason it falls apart is the way that the villain is handled. Again, without spoiling anything significant. Safin's entire motivation throughout the film is personal revenge. He's built up to be this mysterious, elusive assassin who is 3 steps ahead of everyone else at all times and stops at nothing to execute his vengeance. And then as soon as we get to the island in the final act, he does a 180 and seems to no longer care about revenge, and instead about, well, this is a good question actually. What does he care about? Because it's very difficult to say. You could interpret some of his actions as maybe seeking profit, as pure greed, but then if you think about it, the mechanics of what he's doing and selling paint him to be much more of a straight up, insane, genocidal maniac. And really, I felt like the movie doesn't even attempt to explain how all of that fits together, why the change, or even the basic logistics of the entire final 40 minutes of the film. Now, let me be clear, the initial revenge motivation to me was spectacular and really interesting and felt fresh. The insanity genocide stuff towards the end, I wouldn't even have that much of a problem with it in a vacuum. I mean, it is typical Bond villain stuff after all. The problem is that these two things, they work separately, but not together. it feels like two very different movies stitched together without much thought behind it, and this is just jarring and disappointing and silly. There's also this one moment where Safin has, again, without spoilers, he's got like this plot device and says to the other henchman that this is his insurance, right? And then he never informs Bond that he has it in order to sort of hold it over his head, to use it to scare or manipulate him or to influence his decisions or to buy his own security. No, he just straight up ends up using that on Bond, this plot device at the very end, when it's already pretty clear that it will make zero difference for him, for his own outcome. So how is that insurance exactly? And I mean, it may sound like I'm nitpicking, but this is supposed to be some genius savant guy, and yet the things that he says and does in the final act just make zero sense whatsoever. And I have to say that took me out of the movie for a bit, which is a shame because the actual ending of it was quite bold, well done, very emotional, and I liked it. But I just couldn't help myself thinking, okay, this is great, but the last half hour was just dumb as shit. I also mentioned the pacing. I would say that the movie has no business being this long, especially because around the middle of it, here's the thing, whenever I criticize a movie for being too long, I try to be constructive and think of what could have been removed. And I have a very clear answer for this one. Around the middle part of it, there's a whole section where we as the audience, we already know, we figured out what the main threat is and how it works specifically. And the characters waste a lot of time trying to figure the exact same stuff out, and they waste that time for one reason only. Some of those characters already know, and they are withholding information from the others. Again, at that point in time, for no reason, and ultimately no consequence, because 15 minutes later the truth is out there. I would say you just cut a bunch of scenes in this section, streamline this part of the plot, have the characters just talk honestly, like adult people trying to actually save the world, and progress the plot more quickly. There's also another thing which I want to talk about, which is Lashana Lynch's character. We've known from the leaks and the trailers then that she would be another 00 agent, and I have some thoughts about her. First off, I think her introduction in the film is brilliant. It makes sense within the world of the film and quickly establishes her as a capable spy as well, and her sort of in relation to Bond. And when she says, in basically the first scene, when she says who she is exactly, I immediately thought, oh hell, this is not going to be fun on the internet, because, she's a girl, and she's black, and she's supposed to be a 00 that replaces Bond. People will be very easily upset and by this, and toxic comments are bound to come. Now, I think the filmmakers knew what they were doing introducing her, and I think that they had an incredibly difficult task in balancing the characters. See, if she was too much of a Mary Sue, too badass and self-sufficient and just better in Bond in every respect, then obviously all the more traditional fans, plus all the racists and sexists, will immediately complain about feminism killing Bond, etc. But on the other hand, if you make her too inferior to Bond, then all the feminists and progressives will say, well, what's the point of introducing her? Why bring on a girl if she's just going to be a punching bag? And I think she ends up striking the perfect narrow balance. She is badass and capable, but she clearly feels the need to impress Bond and fill his big shoes. On the other hand, I loved his reactions to her as well, the way that they were executed. He's mostly, or at least he's pretending to be above it all. For the most part, he's not being snarky or provoking. He's only engaging in clever banter when she starts talking shit. But also at the beginning of the film, I mean, you could argue that it's actually her existence that ends up pushing him to go back to action, to prove to the people that he's still superior. In general, their whole dynamic together was one of the better things in the movie for me. And I will say this, I do think that Nomi, that's the name of the character, is not someone I would necessarily like to watch in a solo spin-off movie. But I would love to see more of her and Bond together again. I will also say that you can make an argument that she is kind of redundant as a character in the film after all, and apart from being this reluctant ally / modern foil to James, which is very entertaining, she doesn't bring all that much in terms of the plot, and perhaps the movie didn't really need her. But if the filmmakers really wanted this type of character, I think they did as good a job with her as they could possibly have done by keeping the focus on these two in relation to one another. And I think that's as much as I wanted to say. So to bring all of this around, I think it was an okay conclusion to Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond. I will surely miss him, and I think the Casino Royale and Skyfall were both fantastic and will be remembered for years to come. No Time to Die is not nearly as good, which is a shame because for a good hour and a half it seems to be going in that direction. It starts off really strong, and then falls off heavily towards the last act, and then finally sort of manages to close the film in a good way again. Even so, I think there's enough to like about the film, so that even with its flaws, it's certainly worth seeing, especially on the big screen.